Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody, and welcome to the second of the IPAF webinar series from IPAF. This webinar is the future of safe learning. We have three very good speakers for you today: Kate Pasterfield from Sponge, Darren Vashurin from Serious Labs, and Paul Roddis, our training manager at IPAF. I'm briefly going to give an introduction to IPAF to you all. For those people who don't know IPAF, if you bear with me, I will get my presentation up. Okay, so brief introduction to IPAF. I would just like to thank Skyjack, our sponsors, for sponsoring the series of webinars that we're running. Briefly, IPAF is the International Powered Access Federation. We were set up in 1983 to promote the safe and effective use of powered access worldwide. We are a non-for-profit membership organisation. We have over 1,400 members in over 70 countries. And we represent manufacturers, rental companies, contractors, users. Our member manufacturers represent 90% of the powered access equipment in the market currently. Our remit is to promote the safe and effective use of powered access, and we provide our members with safety campaigns, such as Andy Access, which provides a number of toolbox talks for everybody to use on the safe use of mobile elevating work platforms. We also are heavily involved in influencing and interpreting legislation worldwide, sitting on all standards bodies within all regions. We have an accident data reporting portal that is open to our members and to any users of MUPS, and I would encourage anybody to use that. We will be doing a webinar specifically focused on accidents later on in our series. We produce guidance documents for the use of MUPS and promoting safety, and a number of publications coming from IPAF every year. I've already mentioned the toolbox talks, and we also provide award-winning rental market reports on a yearly basis. We will be doing a webinar on that as well. One of our main focuses is providing training to operators through our registered IPAF training centres. We have both advanced classroom and e-learning courses available for training operators, managers, users. We also have harness courses and demonstrator courses with over 750 training centres worldwide. The PAL card, which is the Powered Access Licence, is recognised worldwide as proof of operator training to the highest standards. And we currently have over 800,000 people active with active PAL cards worldwide. Okay, so that was a brief introduction to IPAF. I'm going to move swiftly on to our first presenter, which is Kate Pasterfield, who is the senior lead at Sponge, and she will tell you, I'm sure, about Sponge within her presentation. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Giles. I'm hoping you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I am Kate Pasterfield. I head up learning strategy, and previous to this, innovation at Sponge. Sponge is a digital learning company. We've been around for about 16 years, emphasising everything online and digital and innovative, really, in terms of content and e-learning. And today I wanted to just share a little bit about digital learning in a post-COVID world. because a lot of the experiences and discussions that we're now having with clients are all about what's happening post-COVID, and amongst our kind of global client base, these are the sorts of themes that I wanted to share with you and the things that they're talking about. And some of the examples that I'll share today will be from some examples that we've worked on with our clients. Oh, let's just see if this is working. Okay, cool. So we're all emerging from lockdown, and some of us furlough, and the world has changed quite significantly. And what we're hearing from our clients is that there's been this huge kind of acceleration towards digitizing learning. And clients are often looking, and organizations are looking to digital to find ways that they can help train their people in a new fashion. And they're sort of confronted with a wealth of innovations that support learning. And I wanted to share some of those today and kind of give a nod to innovation, but categorized into these sort of 5 categories really, which is challenges that we're hearing from our clients. So we're going to go through each one in turn, but broadly they're going to cover learners being harder to reach, people finding difficulty practicing in ready environments. I'll come on to what that is. The imperative to upskill rapidly, keeping up with increasing expectations, and learning and development data for tracking and analytics often being insufficient. So we'll start with the first one, learners are harder to reach. This is a brilliant stat. In April this year, nearly 50% of UK adults were working from home as a result of social distancing measures. And we also have the whole, concept of deskless workers, so people who might be in warehouses or contractors or nurses, doctors, people without often access to computers, and quite frequently working in shifts, which makes them really quite difficult to reach when you're distributing learning of a digital nature, and of course also face-to-face. So some of the strategies that we've been looking at for reaching these sort of deskless workers really rely on mobile and techniques like microlearning and missions. So for example, many people now are allowed to bring mobiles into work, although maybe not use them on their shifts. But we're looking at ways that we can create mobile learning experiences through things like offline apps, making sure that things are responsive to any device. And really, for example, this is quite a nice one where we created an app that you can set a pledge up each week. In this case, the retailer we were working with wanted their staff to set up a pledge around customer service. So this particular one is making customers smile. And each day they were able to tick whether they'd made a customer smile and kind of log whether they'd achieved their pledge by the end of the week. But essentially, lots of organizations now have bring your own device strategies and approaches, and therefore mobile's pretty much the way to go. The other big trend that we're seeing is learning, in the flow of work. So sometimes we might produce a learning intervention or set of e-learning, and it might take quite a long time between when someone's learned it and when they need to apply it. And so what we focus on here is what job aids and tools can we put in their actual workflow at the point of need so that they can access either training or prompts. And a good example of that would be a project at IKEA, where they had forklift truck drivers, and the device within their forklift truck was providing them with tips and tools on how to lift and move items around the warehouse. Now, you've probably heard Giles perhaps talking before about augmented reality, but I think there are 2 drivers as to why this is really going to become big in the next few years. One of them is that our mobile devices have now got really quite good capability for augmenting information of a useful nature into our environment. And the other is that there's been a big surge in smart glasses recently, with major players like Samsung and Google getting back into the game again, and Apple, all kind of rumored to be preparing in the next couple of years to release the smart glasses. And I think we need to start thinking about how and where we might find useful use cases. So for instance, I've heard of a bakery where they were using smart glasses in fulfillment. People were able to get the order up in their glasses, and then they would know what to pick and pack. And that was really improving efficiency. It was a bit of an early prototype, so I think they had some issues with people wearing the glasses for 8 hours a day. But you know, this is a world that's ours for the taking and ready to be explored. So the second one is around things being difficult, learning being difficult to practice in a ready environment. So what we mean by ready is risky, expensive, dangerous, or inaccessible. And these are environments like oil rigs or mines. And quite often, simulating an experience is the only way for people to practice and learn. And so inevitably, a really good use case for virtual reality. And to give you an example of one that we worked on with the Royal Mail, over 40 postal workers a week were getting attacked by dogs on their postal routes. And so we created a virtual reality experience in mobile VR because it was scalable and accessible and affordable for people to be able to do, to help them go through a kind of day in the life of a postal worker and avoid the hazards and dangers of dogs that might come up and attack you, even quite friendly dogs. So it's quite an interesting project for us to work on. But virtual reality is increasingly being used in workplaces for training in dangerous environments, and certainly something to consider. And here are just a few good use cases, and very much looking forward to what Darren's going to share with us a bit later about sort of virtual reality and augmented environments. But here are some that we're seeing our clients interested in: systems and processes, health and safety, crisis and emergency, very obvious use cases, but increasingly we're seeing people moving into more interpersonal skills and soft skills in customer service and onboarding and HR. So another way that we might be able to help people practice in environments is through 3D worlds and tours. And new technology is making it increasingly easy for us to be able to use scanning equipment and photogrammetry to go around a building, for instance, or a site or a workshop or a factory and make up 3D models. And then afterwards in post-production, we can add in markers, and people can explore these environments in a really active way. And this doesn't have to be in a virtual reality headset, although it could be. It can often just be as good on a desktop or a mobile device. And so we're doing tours similar to this for clients like Tetra Pak, when they've got lots of people who need to understand how their manufacturing is working and their factories work, but they can't fly everybody to Germany. So consider those tours and 3D worlds as options for practice. All right, moving on. Imperative to upskill rapidly. So this is around job uncertainty following the pandemic, but actually we were already seeing a move towards this through automation up until 2020. But it's leaving people feeling quite at risk. And on the flip side of that, quite hungry to learn because they recognize that they need to keep their skills relevant in order to maintain their employment. And so businesses have a role to play here, we think, in providing learners with relevant resources. And some of those that we've been working on are things like tools to navigate change. So this is an example, pretty simple example really, of a very nicely designed website that collates together all of the jobs that are available in a mid-sized organization. But critically, it showed you what your skills were and what the skills were for the job, so that if you wanted to apply for it, you would know what you had to do or what extra skills that you needed in order to be able to apply for it. So it was a way of sort of bridging that gap. The aspiration being that this company wanted to keep their people in the organization and not have them leave and go to the competition. And something we're quite passionate about at Sponge is games. So we like the idea of games to create mastery because they're a quick and fun way of upskilling people quite effectively. And again, some that we've produced is a mobile suite of games on some quite dull topics like GDPR. And we've made that more interesting by giving people tons and tons of examples to practice with. So it's a mobile game. They get to Swipe is the mechanic left and right to be able to decide whether something is at risk or whether they should post it or whether that's an email they can share. So through practicing that, we're able to upskill people quite quickly. That's going to be helpful in this environment where people are feeling job uncertainty. Okay, fourth, keeping up with increasing expectations. So this is around learners getting their hands on better technology and us needing in learning to create experiences that are on par with the kinds of experiences they're having online. And so one of the big things that I love talking about, recommending and sort of pushing for is around just generally upgrading your learning. So if you're doing e-learning and it's dated looking and kind of click next and the characters are, they're not modern, you can absolutely take a step towards upgrading things so that they're giving people an experience of the contemporary web. And I like this, lockdown has driven internet use up by 70% and streaming by 12%. So what we're also seeing is that people are just consuming video hugely. And so the quality of our experiences probably needs to be quite media rich. It needs to look good and perhaps borrow from some of the cues that we're looking at in terms of sort of great journalism and online web design, but also really leveraging games and interactivity to make sure that these experiences are as good as they can be and engaging for people. And linked to that is around modern platforms. Many of our clients are using, big enterprise LMSs whose interfaces have not been updated for a long time. And actually the whole user experience is a really important part of whether and how people engage with your content. So access has to be good, and the user interface needs to look good. And of course, also give us other benefits in terms of tracking, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this is our final challenge around around sort of post-COVID learning. And this one, to be honest, was here before COVID, but even more now, we're seeing clients just absolutely deeply desiring better data for being able to show the effectiveness and efficacy of the courses that have been delivered, or indeed the programs, so that they can either justify their spends or show the impact to their stakeholders. And what we're hearing, and I have a whole other talk about this, which I'll signpost you to at the end if you're interested, is around completions just not being a sufficient enough metric to determine whether learning was effective. So we need better ways of doing this. And two ways that I think would be quite useful for us to implement, and are one a little bit harder, more of an investment, the other one a bit easier to do. The first one is around insights-driven dashboards. So really, we want data to help us either evidence a hypothesis or to prove something or disprove something. And what we really need is to take action from the evidence that we're seeing. And so the platforms that we use, our own Spark platform, for example, is an LRS, a learning record store, which means it can contain much more granular, detailed data. For example, at an individual level, which questions has a person answered, which ones are they getting wrong and right, how many attempts. And what we can do with that is we can aggregate that up into trends, and we can see where is this organization on certain questions, and if they're struggling, does that relate to a performance issue that is known in the business? So really worth getting a good platform that has brilliant data. Or if you can't, something else that we have been doing recently for clients is around collating key quantitative data into email digests. So for example, if a client has a program that's going live and it's going to be running over the next couple of weeks, sometimes it's really tough for people to be able to go and get all the different data sources for their project. So we pull those all together through APIs and put them into one digest. So for example, here you can see people, how many people have signed up, completed, how many certificates have been downloaded, and that's all coming from web data, or it could be LMS data. But we're also pulling in support tickets raised and closed, and that's coming from Zendesk's API, and surveys completed, which is coming from SurveyMonkey. So we're able to sort of aggregate this together and just pull it into a snapshot so that people in learning and development who are managing these campaigns can take proactive actions. So there we go. That kind of almost draws me to the end. These are the things that we're talking about with digital, helping us to reach the masses with mobile, micro, and learning in the flow of work. We're creating practice opportunities with VR and 3D. We're upskilling rapidly using games and job tools. We're exceeding expectations by upgrading our content, really thinking about video and the quality of experience and platforms that we're giving people. And we're gaining insights with dashboards and digests. So if you would like to hear more, I have pulled together this talk into a download, so do feel free to access it at this link. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kay. That was very interesting, very insightful. Certainly lots of food for thought for ourselves. There's some exciting stuff there, and it's just understanding how best to use it in the future and the future for learning. There is an opportunity to ask questions. If you have questions, there is a toolbar at the bottom. If you click on that, you should be able to put some questions to Kate at the end and to all of our speakers. So if you want to use that, we'll review those and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. But now I'm going to pass over to Darren Verschuren from Serious Labs. He's the International Account Director for Serious Labs. Over to you, Darren.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? Thanks, Giles, and thanks, Kate. That was really interesting. I enjoyed that. Just a bit about me. I work for Serious Labs. We're a technology company based out of Edmonton in Alberta, Canada. And my background is really the MUPE industry and the training industry. I was working out exactly how long this morning, and it made me feel quite old. It's officially 25 years now in the MUPE industry, and in the last year, I went to join Serious Labs to go onto the technology side. So
Darren, I think we've got a problem with your sound. Have you got your mic muted?
no, is it still there, mate? Can you hear me now?
It is now. It is now. Sorry.
Let's go back. It was it must not have been plugged in properly. Look, I'm Darren, and I'll take you up from where we are. So I work for Serious Labs. So we were discussing our simulator. I was discussing it obviously on my own. So if you see the simulator there, so what we have is a simulator that the person stands in. They put on the headset, and the headset gives them access to this amazing virtual digital world that Serious Labs have created. Inside the physical simulator, there are boom lift controls. So we have a diesel boom lift controls and 2 scissor lift controls. So there's a diesel scissor lift and an electric scissor lift. And the biggest thing that sets this aside from anything else that I've ever experienced when I first had a go 2.5 years ago is the way that the base moves. So the base has 4 actuators that when you're selecting a control or when you're moving the machine within the virtual reality system, the base will move. And in my view, what it changes it from being an experience or a game to actually having the potential to be a simulator for actually being in a real MUPE. So the base moving really makes a big difference.
Darren, we've lost you again.
I'm not sure, mate. Hang on.
Yeah, you're back on now.
Right, I'm not going to touch anything. It was working this morning. It's just as well I work for a technology company. Right, so moving forward for actually using the machine. So why would you have a virtual reality simulator for using scissor lifts and booms? Well, my background is working for training centers. I've set up my own training centers, and one of the biggest problems you have is that training does have to be a commercially viable business. And although as a training center you might want an acre of space, having rough terrain grounds, having all sorts of stuff for the delegates to experience on the course, it's not always possible within the access yard, the site you're training, or the business that is going to be a training center. So what you have the potential within virtual reality is you can create anything that you imagine. It can be as big as you like, it can be have as many features as you like, and it can all be done within a safe environment. You can also simulate high risk activities that would not be possible within a traditional training course or within any kind of familiarization. So we have the potential to take operators and put them in situations that would not be possible in the real world, so they can create learnings and understand and be in a better position for when they actually start working on the real machine. Social distancing, which was covered very well by Kate earlier, and I'm sure Paul is going to go into a lot more detail. We've had the same issues as pretty much every business since the outbreak. And talking to our clients, what we found is the one advantage you can have by using simulators for assessment and for training that we'll talk about is that it's very controllable. So you can put the simulator in a room, you can lock the room, you can make sure access is very controlled. The trainer or the facilitator that's running the assessment or the training, it's because it's static, it's movable, it does become easier to manage than trying to look after a scissor lift that's out in a real workplace being used communally. We don't have issues with the environment or the weather that we're training in. Having done some training out in the Middle East, it's very hot. Having trained in the UK, it's very wet. We don't have issues with courses being cancelled because of the wind. In our simulator, it's always a nice, sunny, mild day. So you're always going to have the same environment. And training in a realistic environment before starting work. We're going to look a little bit later about an environment that we created for the aviation industry. But because we're working in virtual reality, we have the potential to alter environments to create something that's as real life as possible, so that when the operator steps from the training course, from the virtual reality simulator to actually starting work, they're as prepared as they could possibly be. The aviation industry that we'll look at had issues with actually carrying out training courses and familiarizations next to aeroplanes because of how expensive they are and how fragile they are if you give them a bit of a whack with a machine. So by putting an aeroplane within the virtual reality, you can actually get them to practice and to make learnings and make mistakes in virtual reality before they'll actually start the traditional work. And we can take the training to the client. So the big thing here is it's effectively when we take the simulator to the client's premises, it's like picking up the best training center that you've got and taking it straight to the client's premises. So what you don't have is a fight for space. The machine's been used by someone else, isn't charged. You know, other people are trying to use the same environment that you are. You can take the simulator and take the perfect training center straight to the client's premises. And people are not going to want to travel so far. So you're going to find, in my opinion, you're going to have more on-site requests than maybe you would have had post-COVID. The data side of it. This was touched on earlier by Kate, and I do really agree. Over the last 3 or 4 months, we're really starting to look at the way that the simulator measures people. So our simulator in assessment mode is looking at exactly where the person is looking, exactly how they're using the controls, the order of the functions, and exactly how they're doing it. And it's producing a report based on the digital readings it's getting from that. Now, when you're carrying out these assessments, it's always the same time of day, and it's always going to be exactly the same for every person taking the assessment. So what it allows you to do, which is difficult when you're looking at an instructor-led assessment, which is left to the definition and the interpretation of the instructor, is you can start to measure one operator from the assessment against another operator, and you can start to measure improvement, which becomes interesting. So what you're looking to have, let's take an example. If you took a guy that's going to be starting a project, so John Smith is going to be driving mutes onto a project. He turns up on the site. Now, if he goes onto the simulator in an assessment mode, we can test him. Within 20-30 minutes, we'll have a detailed interpretation of how he operates, where he looks, and how safe and efficient he is. Now, from that, you can create what he's missing, so what issues they face. And if you send them back into the workplace with things to try and develop, that might be going with an experienced operator, sitting on a new training course, it might be all sorts of things. But in 6 weeks or 3 months, when you retest that person, you can map their progress through. So by continually assessing the operators that were on that project, you can map where John starts on the project. So what was his efficiency and his safety before? And is he improving? Is he getting worse? You know, is there further actions required? And then we can you can actually start to compare different sites. You can start to compare different trades. You can start to compare different countries. So if you're a main contractor or you're in charge of lots of operators, we can produce digital reports of exactly how everyone is tracking on the site. So we can then tailor what's needed for each person based on the report from the last score. And are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Do they require retraining? And the reports that are scored digitally, so they're tracked exactly to each individual operator, they can be accessed online, are becoming really important. And certainly as we're developing new stuff, the way that we interpret and manage data is a big thing, and the assessment process is certainly something that's gonna create our future moving forward. The airline environment that we looked at before, so this was a particular need for the aviation industry. So the construction environments that we had were generally rough ground because it was a construction site, and flat lines that you were working at because the building was generally flat. In the aviation industry, it was the other way around. So they have flat ground, but a curved surface. So what we created was a series of tasks in and around the aeroplane, making sure that each operator was in a position where they could practice working next to the aeroplane, getting to the logo light, the parts on the tail, underneath the tail. Because as you can see there, if you're going to take a bit of a bang of a Dreamliner, 180 million is going to cost you a few pennies. So it's been able to practice, analyze, and record data for the aviation industry was just one example of what we can do moving forward. The next one we were looking at was the PAL Plus, which is, I've been doing PAL Plus for a good few years. The PAL Plus course is a brilliant course to be able to run as a trainer. It allows operators to really get some excellent practical experience driving the machines. But from a training center and a trainer's perspective, it can be quite difficult to run. So a lot of the time it wasn't a permanent fixture in the yard. It takes up a lot of space because you need so much room to maneuver. It uses 3 machines, which is brilliant for the course, but is not always great to be able to run the training course. It's weather dependent. I don't know if you can see the rig on the top corner. With it, the thing tends to move when the wind gets a bit above normal, and you're unable to complete it on site. So over the previous year, we've been working closely with Paul and Giles and the guys at IPAF to create a version that's going to be available within the virtual world. We're currently undergoing testing, and we need to get to the end of that to know exactly what it will look like. But this has the potential to solve some of those problems and to create this course, which is brilliant. It really does give people an excellent experience in practical operation of the machine, and to bring it more into the masses and to hopefully get the course to take off a lot more. Using simulators. Now, the last bits we'll start to look through before I'll hand over to Paul is we get, the first thing is that simulators in a very traditional industry is disruptive. So I understand that it's controversial. It can be, we have we generally have people that either love it or absolutely hate it. So we are out there. It's disruptive. That's the nature of it. But it's looking at other industries and how they have used simulators. So if you look at pilots as a example that most people would understand, a pilot has a blended approach to, you know, flying airplanes, but when they're doing training in terms of high risk stuff. So if you have a pilot that's practicing to go through a thunderstorm or landing on the Hudson River, or if 2 engines blow out, how do they do it? They don't do that in the air. They do that within a simulator. And using that approach, so the simulator doesn't solve every problem for learning, but it does have a place within the whole spectrum to be able to create safer operators. And there's many industries now that are using simulators, so Formula 1 drivers to pilots to military and all sorts of different areas. Simulators provide a safe environment for people to create learnings to take out into the workplace. So if you're working in a high hazard environment, to be able to make mistakes in virtual reality, to learn for when you go into reality is a massive opportunity and a massive potential that we can bring and make a safer industry. I think that's me. If you could hear me for the whole time, Giles, I'm not quite sure what happened at the start, but if you want to get in touch, there's my email, and I'm sure it'll be recorded afterwards. But it's we're going to develop these things moving forward, and hopefully we'll take the product into something that's more mainstream going on.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, we did hear most of that. There was a couple of glitches at the beginning, but we managed to cover that at the end. Really appreciate the presentation. I know I've certainly used the simulator, and I certainly think it does have a place in the training of operators. And I'm very excited about the work we're doing with you on the PAL Plus course, certainly. I am going to move quickly on to Paul Roddis, who is IPAF's training manager, and he's going to continue talking to you about some of the stuff that IPAF have done with regards to the current situation we're all finding ourselves in and the future of safe learning. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Giles. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and welcome to the almost 300 people joining us from 39 different countries. And that's really fantastic. If there can be a positive drawn from the terrible worldwide affliction, it is that we now seem to be having much better global communication. And the coming together of like-minded people from across the planet with a common goal of protecting people from harm. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, some countries are in different positions, slowly relaxing lockdown restrictions. Some are putting them back in as a second wave begins, potentially. Some are still battling with a huge first wave. I mean, the US and Brazil particularly badly hit right now. But in spite of this situation, certain work remains essential. And some of that work requires the use of MUPs. The operators of those MUPs and anyone that's supervising them also has to be trained and competent. So that means that training has to continue to a degree, of course, differently in different regions. We've seen some really exciting potential future options from Kate and Darren, but this section really is simply about the future of safe learning. And of course, that future starts right now. I'd like to briefly begin with an overview of the risk assessment process, which I know so many of you are completely familiar with, but I think it's important to understand where the existing solutions that IPAF have created fit within that critical process. So the first step, of course, is to determine what it is that can cause harm. In this case, it's an additional hazard to add into your existing risk assessment, and this, of course, is the coronavirus. We know how this is transmitted, and we know, where these droplets can be and so on. So that's quite helpful when we start selecting control measures. Something that's also very important is that studies have shown that people can spread coronavirus even if they don't have symptoms. And in fact, a person might be the most contagious just before symptoms begin. So we can't tell just by looking at people. So having identified this hazard, then the next step we need to do is to consider the whole process as far as who might be harmed and how that can happen. So it's a case of really considering, how people will arrive, how they will enter a premises, every transition, every movement, where are they going to be sitting potentially, what about the practical training, and how are they going to leave? Really taking control of that whole process, and looking at where an interaction could occur and how we can control or prevent that particular interaction. So having determined who might be harmed and how that could happen, then we can move on to start evaluating the level of risk and determining the control measures that we would like. Now, when we apply a control measure, the idea is, of course, to reduce the risk. So the most effective way of reducing risk would be to eliminate it altogether. If we can't achieve that, then we have to move down to the next most effective control measure and determine whether we could apply that. As we know, frequently we actually need to apply a combination of controls. And while PPE is the least effective, when used in combination with other more effective controls, we can achieve a safe situation. Importantly, we have to make sure that any new controls for coronavirus don't compromise any existing safety controls. So bottom line, if an activity can't be done safely, then don't allow it to take place. So having decided on the precautions, we can move on to step 4. And this is where we have to document the process and implement the control process and actually put those controls in place. So once we've done that, we need to make sure that we communicate effectively. So this really needs to be done in advance, where people are going to be arriving, whether this be a training instructor arriving at your premises, your site. They need to know in advance, how to arrive, how to enter, and things need to be very, very clear. We need to cooperate and coordinate with anyone else that might be there. This could be staff, contractors, etc. And we need to make sure that we've got really frequent, very, very clear reminders of the controls, what people are expected to do. We don't want people to ever be in a position where they have to guess, because when we guess, there's a very good chance that we might guess wrong. And of course, human beings and human nature, we still have to check that people are actually complying with the controls that we've put in place. We know people will cut corners potentially, so it's keeping an eye out and just making sure that what we want to happen is actually what's happening. So that actually leads quite nicely on to step 5, where if the controls aren't being effective, if people are cutting corners, if people can't be bothered to go over to a certain point for something, then what we need to do is we need to be aware of that, and we need to improve it to make it less likely to go wrong, more convenient, easier to use. So having looked at that, then of course we need to continue to monitor people's health. And we need to monitor the current advice, be that from the World Health Organization, local government, etc., and adapt to any changes in advice or circumstances. A good example of this is in the UK, the wearing of masks in shops becomes compulsory on the 28th of July. So that's shops. But I think as a training centre, we would have to consider, well, what are the similarities between a shop environment and a training environment? So should we now be applying masks? That, of course, is a control measure assessment and decision based on your own premises and your own decisions. But it's certainly something that should be considered. So now we can move on to what we can do right now, how our IPAF is helping with this particular situation. So the ideal, of course, being eliminate, and there are ways that we can eliminate a certain amount of face-to-face training. One of them is using e-learning. Now, e-learning for IPAF has grown significantly since all of the lockdowns began. And in fact, since the beginning of March, over 6,000 people have completed IPAF e-learning. And that's a really huge figure because people are used to traditional training methods. So it's down to training centres really taking this on, seeing the benefits, giving it to their customers, the customers seeing the benefit, and it's really working. So if e-learning isn't right for your clients, then the alternative is remote training. It's a great option for those that still want the interaction and ability to question, to clarify, to speak to an instructor, and so on. So something else that's very important that IPAF have done, IPAF have agreed to a grace period of 90 days from license expiry. And this is for those that would be renewing a license. So it's not for first-time take-up. But we also would strongly recommend that those people during that 90-day grace period undertake either the e-learning or remote theory training during that grace period. For the new operators, IPAF have extended the maximum gap between completing their theory and completing their practical, again, to 90 days. And that's 90 days from the time that their training provider resumes practical training courses. So the idea is that we try to spread out the practical elements, giving training centres time to cope with a potential backlog. Now, IPAF, of course, will continue to review this as the situation continues to develop. So in order to help with the elimination of contact, IPAF have implemented facial recognition software into the operator e-learning now. The benefit of this is it's removed the requirement for candidates to undertake the theory exam within the classroom. And it also has the additional benefit of freeing up more time for the all-important practical elements. The system, it's incredibly accurate. We implemented it first for MUPS for managers last year, and it's proved effective, reliable, and very importantly, secure. It maps so many metrics to ensure that this is the right person, and it can also detect whether there are others present, and if that's the case, it can then disable the questions, provide a warning, and in extreme situations it can disable them entirely and prevent ongoing further use. So a great alternative option that eliminates contact, of course, is remote training. Now, Nationwide Platforms ran a remote MUPS for managers training course on the 11th of June, and I attended this to see for myself how it went. It went brilliantly. It ran so well that, due certainly in no small part to the instructor's enthusiasm and engaging delivery, but the interaction was great, with the candidates able to ask questions. You could just click a button, put the hand up, the instructor could answer questions, clarify. And it felt really natural, worked brilliantly. And MUPS for managers is probably the most difficult course to run in this way because of the need for significant interaction. So operator training should be far less challenging than MUPS for managers. And if MUPS for managers runs that well, it should be a really great experience for everyone. Of course, we need group photographs still to demonstrate who's actually on the course, etc. So the ideal thing to do is just take a snip or a screenshot. If for any reason you happen to have too many people to fit on the screen at any one time, you ask those that are on screen when you take the snip to mute their microphones, and then the others to speak, and then they will appear on the screen and you can take a second or potentially third screenshot. So it's relatively straightforward. With a course like MUPS for managers, there are a lot of additional documents that are necessary for utilisation during the ongoing training course. So you have to plan to make sure that they are out there in advance, that all of the clients have them, they have them ready and to hand to actually use during the training course. But of course, it's just planning. For the test itself, then what Nationwide chose to use Microsoft Forms to share the exams digitally, and this worked really, really well. We would certainly expect any training centre that would be using remote training to have a viable digital solution. It certainly doesn't have to be Microsoft Forms. Another good example is, in fact, Google Forms, and there are others. But we just need to know that they're secure, candidates can't keep the questions, they're not being posted or emailed out or anything like that. So if you're going to be doing remote training, please let us know, and please explain to us, how you're intending to control those particular documents. Now, of course, we can't do practical training remotely effectively. So we have to be face to face. And this, of course, applies to MCWPs, hoists, MUPs, everywhere where we have to get people together. So we have to ensure our 2-meter social distancing, and we've got to think about, well, are we going to have to put people into the training room? If they are, what about the transitions? What about the restrooms, the practical area? How are they going to access it? Where are they going to stand? So it's just having, again, a really good, robust plan that's crystal clear to all of the candidates. One thing that we're really keen on is that you have sanitizer available with the machine, and what we would expect is that candidates and the instructor would sanitize their hands before touching controls, gates, etc., but also afterwards. So it's much easier to sanitize a person than it is to try to keep a machine completely sanitized. The moment a person touches that machine, it's no longer sanitized, so sanitize the people. Of course, candidates will be expected to wait for their particular turn on the machine. So mark out a position, maintaining social distancing, and then they only move on when called once the other person has gone back to their particular position. And of course, for certain practical elements, there is specific PPE required. So, for example, checking batteries, etc. So PPE shouldn't be shared unless it can be really effectively sanitized between people, but that's really quite difficult. So one of the options that many organizations are taking up is that they're requiring that candidates bring their own PPE, and that's fine, but of course sometimes people forget or they bring inappropriate or inadequate PPE. So it is definitely worth having a backup plan. And having new PPE that you could sell to them or provide to them, however you want to do it, so that you have a solution to any of those potential problems that, let's be honest, can be reasonably easily foreseen. Once it's all finished, then the instructors, of course, require feedback, and they're going to need the forms to come into them complete. So extra important now that all of those forms are checked for accuracy and any missing information before the candidates leave. What you certainly don't want to be doing is asking a candidate to come back in, because now you've doubled the amount of interaction. So get it right first time, and then when you do allow them to leave, you need to control how they leave. If someone leaves the training room and you think they're leaving, but actually they've decided to quickly pop to the toilet before going, that could ruin all of your plans. So you just need to know, you've just got to ask the right questions and control it effectively. So as far as some additional support's concerned, IPAF have created a range of resources to support members and training centres. One of these is a fairly comprehensive technical guidance document for operating MUPs safely with relation specifically to COVID-19. This is available from the IPAF website, and to further support this document, IPAF held a webinar presented brilliantly by Chris Wraith. Chris expanded on the points within the document and added further advice for clarification that couldn't really be fitted into that document. So it's well worth getting hold of the document and watching the webinar, which is still available on the IPAF website in the resources section. There is a section in that document about training, which gives, again, some fairly detailed advice. And this is geared up for organisations that will be doing training on their own premises. For training centres, we created a different guidance document which provides comprehensive advice for keeping training safe. So this is available to training centres on the IPAF training website. And the last document that I'll mention today is a straightforward document detailing how to conduct remote training, and it gives almost step-by-step instructions on how training centres can go about running remote training. This, again, available to training centres on the IPAF training website, and it's also had been sent out to all of these training centres. So thank you very much indeed for listening. Absolutely fantastic. And what I'd like to do now is move into a question and answer session where there have been questions come in, so we'll try to answer those as effectively as we can. So questions we have here. Okay, some of them already been answered. Oh, that's excellent. So I have a question for Darren. I've used the simulator with you and enjoyed the learning experience. I'd like to know if you see this as a cost benefit that organisations will go to compared with the traditional method.
Hopefully I've got my mic sorted out now, so
I can hear you.
There you go, mate. Yeah, I mean, it's cost is it's hard to it depends what you're basing it against. You know, technology at the start is always going to be maybe slightly more costly than it will be moving forward, but you know, in terms of potentially solving problems that will save money in the long term, I certainly believe so. I think there are massive benefits, financial being one of them, to doing things within simulation, as well as doing things within real life. It's the marrying of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. Well, thank you very much for that. Next question. Kate's already answered that one. Right. Can you change the weather conditions? So this is another one for you, Darren. I think it means virtual weather conditions. I hope.
I haven't quite got my my magic powers yet, so I'm presuming virtual. At the moment, no, but it is definitely on the continuous innovation. It's on the agenda. Being able to add wind, being able to add different conditions to make it as realistic as possible, I certainly see as part of our future, as well as other things like the weight within the machine. It will react differently, and introducing other machines and other plant into the simulation. So the simple answer is no, not yet, but it's certainly in our future, I think.
Yeah, that for me is really exciting. And I understand that the variables that have got to go into that to make that accurate. But I mean, even now as it is, it's just absolutely incredible. And the next question, which is how far are we from IPAF issuing certification to support VR training? Well, the answer to that is we're close. We believe we're close. We're working very closely with Serious Labs to look at the measuring, as Darren mentioned earlier, to make sure that it's accurate relative to an IPAF training course. At the moment, we're only looking at PAL Plus and potentially recertification, of course, because those people have already been tested on a real MUP. We'll keep working on it and make sure that we publicise how far we are through when we get in toward that point. Right, another question. Okay. Paul. What's the chance of someone else could be in the room on an e-learning which is out of camera shot? Would or could the system pick this up? For example, someone could be telling them what the answers are. That is a very good question, and the answer to that is no. That there are limitations, of course, to a system that uses visual input. It is possible that someone could be out of shot, but they would have to know what the question is, and then they'd have to supply them the answer. And although it's possible, it's very, very unlikely that would happen. So in the same way that in a classroom training situation, there have been situations where people have memorized sequences of answers, but haven't in fact known the meaning of the answers. It is always possible to cheat, but it's a tiny minority and the likelihood is very small. So we're comfortable with that very low likelihood. Okay, another question here. Any indoor training environment in the UK should involve wearing a mask from 24th of July. Something. Okay, don't know how COVID-19 spreads, for example, who stated COVID could spread through the air, not just water droplets, and don't know how long the virus lives on soft furnishing, up to 2 weeks, and difficult to clean. That's absolutely true. There are so many unknowns. We can only deal with the knowns. And then it's straight back to the risk assessment. If it's an unknown, then we have to try to guess the likelihood. and then put in a control measure that's effective against this potential likelihood. So if something's incredibly unlikely, we're less likely to have to take account of it as to where it's reasonably likely. So it is guessing, and it's being comfortable with the control measures that you put into place. Okay, next question. Oh, that one's already been covered. One here from Tony Warren, who is on the IPAF training committee. Is the delegate scoring on the e-learning theory sessions on par with the classroom sessions? We've used the e-learning module. It's a great way to train. The instructor said he felt a lot more relaxed, spending more time, and he felt delegates were more focused on the practical session as they haven't been sitting in a class for 3 to 4 hours. We'll be using this as much as we can. It's much needed in the current situation. That's absolutely fantastic, Tony. That's really positive. And as far as answering the initial question is concerned, the scoring seems almost identical to what we would expect in a classroom. So it's working really well. We are getting the same results that we would expect in a classroom. It's not for everyone, e-learning. Some people find it difficult, but of course there is the remote learning as well, which can equally be utilised. I think the extra time that can be spent on the practical is absolutely brilliant. I think, ultimately the reality is operating machines is the dangerous bit. You need to know enough theoretically, but once people start using equipment, that's where the emphasis needs to be. So extra time for that I can only see as a positive. Okay, everyone, what time is it? Oh, 1 minute past 1, so I'm slightly overrunning. I'll just see if I can get one last question in. Okay, so Andy Cartwright, who used to be on the training committee, highly respected health and safety professional, his question stroke statement: one area that we have to be aware of when completing practical training is ensuring that face masks are available for the instructor in case first aid needs to be carried out, because the 2-meter rule can't be followed when administering. Absolutely right. So that would be part of the risk assessment. That would actually be part of your first aid risk assessment that has to be in place anyway. How can this continue to be done safely? And I think actually that corresponds quite nicely with one particular element of the practical training, where a candidate would be in the platform, but the instructor needs to familiarise the candidate on the controls. That's the point of familiarisation. So it'd be very hard to keep that 2-meter distance. So masks would be entirely appropriate for those particular situations, in the same way as they would be for administering first aid. So it is taking account of all of those different interactions. Okay, so I think. Okay, the last one, you mentioned using Google, Microsoft or Google Forms. What's stopping them just taking a picture or screenshot of the questions? Absolutely nothing, other than integrity and being told not to. And I would potentially, to an extent, tell people that we will know if you do this, because the system tells us if you're taking screenshots. But you will be able to look those people in the eye. You'll be able to see them, see what they're doing. So I would suggest that you would know if someone's potentially cheating or doing something untoward. They only get one question at a time when they're using, on screen, when using some of these formats. So they would have to take, 30 screenshots, and as all the questions are randomized and in different orders, there wouldn't be really any huge benefit in them going to those incredible lengths and you not noticing. I think it's probably time to wrap it up now. It's gone 1 o'clock, so I've overrun, which is extremely unlike me. I mean, who would have thought it? So what I just want to do is thank our brilliant speakers. Kate, thank you so much. Darren, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. It's easy to get hold of you both as well. I know you've put contact details. And of course, I need to thank our sponsor, Skyjack. If you would like to contact me or anyone within IPAF Training, we have an email address that is training@ipaf.org. This whole webinar has been recorded and will be available on the IPAF website. And so thank you very much indeed. And please join the other webinars that are coming along in the very near future.